But what Roloff snaps? Roloff snaps. Caryn's evil plot against Amy exposed. Little people, big world. You think you know the Roloff family? The charming farm, the wholesome reality show, the inspiring story of love, family, and resilience. But what if I told you that behind the pumpkin patches and smiling photos, there was a calculated betrayal that it tore a family apart? What if the woman who appeared to be just a friend was actually orchestrating one of the most devastating long cons in reality television history? Matt Roloff has finally broken his silence, and what he's revealing about Caryn Chandler will change everything you thought you knew about Little People Big World. This isn't just another celebrity breakup. This is a story about manipulation, deceit, and a love triangle that destroyed a marriage while cameras were rolling. The question everyone's been asking for years finally has an answer, and Matt Roloff is not holding back anymore. Let's go back to where it all started. Back to 2006, when a little show called Little People Big World premiered on TLC. America fell in love with Matt and Amy Roloff. Here was a couple who didn't let their dwarfism define them. They built a thriving pumpkin farm in Oregon. They raised 4 beautiful children. They showed the world that different doesn't mean less than. Matt was the dreamer, the entrepreneur, the guy with a million ideas and the energy to make them happen. Amy was the practical one, the heart of the family, the mom who kept everything running when Matt's projects threatened to spiral out of control. For the first few seasons, they seemed unstoppable. Sure, they bickered like any couple, but it felt real. It felt authentic. Viewers didn't just watch the show. They felt like part of the Roloff family. The farm became a destination. Tourists came from all over the country to experience the magic that Matt and Amy created. Pumpkin season at Roloff Farms wasn't just a business. It was an empire, and Matt and Amy built it together, side by side, one dream at a time. But reality television has a dark side. When you invite cameras into your home, into your marriage, into your most private moments, those cameras don't just record your life. They change it. They magnify every crack. They turn small disagreements into dramatic storylines. And somewhere along the way, the Roloffs stopped performing for the cameras and started performing for each other. The early years of Little People Big World were pure magic. Audiences watched Zach, Jeremy, Molly, and Jacob grow up before their eyes. They celebrated milestones. They cried during hospital scares. They cheered when the kids achieved things doctors said might be impossible. Matt became a household name. He wrote books. He gave motivational speeches. He turned his story of overcoming adversity into an inspiration for millions. Amy became a beloved figure too. The every woman who juggled motherhood, marriage, and running a business with grace and humor. The show was so successful that it ran for over a decade. 14 seasons, more than 300 episodes. The Roloffs weren't just reality stars, they were an institution. Behind the scenes, Matt was always hustling. He was building structures on the farm, planning new attractions, thinking bigger, bolder, more ambitious. Amy supported him, even when his projects made her nervous, even when the budget got tight, even when she worried he was taking on too much. But here's what viewers didn't see in those early seasons. Here's what was happening when the cameras stopped rolling. Matt and Amy were drifting apart. The partnership that looked so strong on screen was crumbling in private. Matt felt unappreciated. He believed Amy didn't support his vision. He thought she was holding him back, always saying no, always worried about what could go wrong instead of celebrating what could go right. Amy felt abandoned. She was raising 4 kids, managing the household, dealing with the daily chaos, while Matt disappeared into his projects. She needed a partner. She got a dreamer who was never home. And then, in the middle of all this tension, a woman named Caryn Chandler entered the picture. Caryn wasn't a stranger. She started working at Roloff Farms in 2010 as a seasonal employee during pumpkin season. She was friendly, helpful, and good at her job. Amy trusted her. Matt appreciated her work ethic. At first, there was nothing suspicious. Caryn was just another staff member helping out during the busiest time of year. But over time, Caryn's role expanded. She became Matt's assistant, his right hand, the person he relied on to manage farm operations. Matt and Caryn started spending more time together. A lot more time. They worked long hours preparing for events. They traveled together for farm business. They had inside jokes and a comfortable rapport that went beyond professional. Amy noticed. Of course she noticed. But what could she say? Caryn was an employee. Matt insisted their relationship was purely professional. He accused Amy of being paranoid, controlling, jealous, without cause. But Amy's instincts were screaming that something was wrong. She saw the way Matt lit up when Caryn was around. She noticed how he volunteered for farm tasks that would put him in Caryn's orbit. She felt herself becoming invisible in her own marriage. By 2013, the cracks in Matt and Amy's marriage were impossible to hide. The show stopped pretending everything was perfect. Viewers watched as Matt and Amy attended counseling. They aired their grievances on camera. Matt complained that Amy was negative and resistant to change. Amy said Matt was never present, always chasing the next project instead of investing in his family. The therapy sessions were brutal to watch. These weren't actors playing roles. These were real people, hurting in real time, trying to save a marriage that might already be beyond saving. And through it all, Caryn Chandler remained in the background, still working at the farm, still spending hours with Matt, still the woman Amy couldn't quite trust, but couldn't quite confront. In 2014, Matt moved out of the family house. He claimed he needed space to think. He said the separation was about giving the marriage room to breathe, but he didn't move far. He moved into a house on the farm property, a house that Caryn Chandler helped him set up and decorate. Amy was devastated. After more than 20 years of marriage, the man she built a life with was choosing to live separately. And the woman, who seemed to be everywhere Matt was, she was still there, still involved, still a constant presence that made Amy feel like a stranger on her own farm. The official announcement came in 2015. Matt and Amy were separating. They assured fans it was amicable. They would co-parent. They would continue working together on the farm. They were committed to keeping the family intact, even if the marriage was ending. But reality is never that clean, especially when there's someone waiting in the wings. It didn't take long for rumors to start swirling. Fans noticed that Caryn was appearing in more of Matt's social media posts. She was at family gatherings. She was traveling with him. The relationship that Matt had insisted was purely professional was suddenly looking very personal. In early 2017, Matt made it official. He confirmed he was dating Caryn Chandler. He claimed the relationship started after his separation from Amy. He insisted there was no overlap, no cheating, no betrayal. Amy didn't buy it, and frankly, neither did a lot of fans. Think about the timeline. Caryn started working at the farm in 2010. Matt and Amy's marriage started falling apart shortly after. Matt moved out in 2014. He was officially dating Caryn by 2017. But how long had feelings been developing? How long had emotional boundaries been crossed before the physical relationship began? Amy addressed it publicly, carefully, but pointedly. She said she believed Matt's relationship with Caryn started before their separation. She said there were things that happened that made it impossible for her to ever fully trust Caryn. She stopped short of calling it an affair, but the implication was crystal clear. Matt denied everything. He painted Amy as bitter and unable to move on. He said she was rewriting history to make herself the victim. He accused her of trying to sabotage his happiness because she couldn't handle that he'd found someone new. The fans were divided. Some believed Matt, accepting his version of events at face value. Others saw through it, recognizing the classic pattern of a man who emotionally checked out of his marriage long before he officially ended it. But here's where the story gets even messier. The farm that Matt and Amy built together, the property that was supposed to be their legacy, became a battleground. Matt wanted to buy out Amy's share. Amy wasn't sure she wanted to sell. The negotiations dragged on for years, growing increasingly bitter. And Caryn, she was right there beside Matt, inserting herself into decisions about a property she had no legal claim to, offering opinions about a family legacy she wasn't part of building. Amy felt erased. She felt like Caryn was trying to replace her, not just in Matt's life, but in the entire narrative of Roloff Farms. The woman who had been there from the beginning, who had sacrificed and struggled and built something from nothing, was being pushed out by someone who showed up when the hard work was already done. The emotional toll was devastating. Amy struggled publicly with the divorce. She talked openly about feeling rejected, replaced, and heartbroken. She'd spent her entire adult life with Matt. She'd built her identity around being his wife and the mother of his children. Now she had to figure out who she was on her own. The farm, once a symbol of unity and achievement, became a constant reminder of everything she'd lost. She couldn't walk through the property without seeing Matt and Caryn together. She couldn't participate in pumpkin season without feeling like an outsider in the world she'd helped to create. But Amy is a survivor. She didn't collapse. She rebuilt. She found love again with a man named Chris Merrick. She started focusing on her own happiness instead of waiting for Matt to acknowledge the pain he'd caused. In 2019, Amy and Chris got engaged. In 2021, they married in a beautiful ceremony at Roloff Farms. It was a bittersweet moment. Amy was genuinely happy, starting a new chapter with a man who valued and respected her. But getting married at the farm meant confronting all the memories of her first marriage, the dreams that didn't come true, the family that looked so different now. Matt attended the wedding. So did Caryn. It was awkward, tense, the kind of situation that sounds fine on paper but feels terrible in practice. Meanwhile, Matt and Caryn's relationship continued, but it wasn't all sunshine and romance. Caryn struggled with her role in the family. The Roloff kids, particularly Zach and Tori, made it clear that Caryn would never replace their mother. There was respect, maybe even politeness, but not warmth, not true acceptance. Caryn also had to navigate the intense scrutiny of being the other woman, whether that label was fair or not. Fans dissected her every move. Her social media posts were analyzed for hidden meanings. She couldn't win. If she was too visible, she was trying too hard to insert herself into the family. If she stayed in the background, she was cold and unfriendly. The farm negotiations finally concluded in 2020. Amy sold her portion of the property to Matt. It was the final severing of their partnership. The farm was his now. Hers and Chris's future would be built somewhere else. For Amy, it was closure. Painful, but necessary. She could finally move forward without being tethered to Matt and the constant reminders of what used to be. But the story didn't end there. Because Matt and Caryn's relationship, the one that supposedly justified all the pain and disruption, started showing cracks of its own. By 2023, rumors started circulating that Matt and Caryn's relationship was in trouble. They were spotted without each other at events where they'd typically appear together. Their social media posts became less couple-focused. The easy chemistry they'd once displayed seemed strained. And then Matt started talking. In interviews and on social media, he hinted that his relationship with Caryn wasn't as solid as it appeared. He talked about disagreements, different visions for the future, the challenges of blending their lives after years of being together. Some fans felt vindicated. This was karma, they said. Matt blew up his marriage for Caryn, and now that relationship was falling apart too. Others felt sad. After all the destruction, all the pain inflicted on Amy and the kids, was it even worth it? But here's where things get really interesting. Matt started reflecting publicly on his divorce from Amy. Not with regret exactly, but with a new perspective. He acknowledged that the split was harder on Amy than he'd initially understood. He admitted that his handling of the situation could have been better. And then came the bombshell. In a recent interview, Matt made comments that stunned fans. He suggested that Caryn had been more involved in the breakdown of his marriage than he'd previously admitted. He hinted that she'd encouraged him to distance himself from Amy, that she'd positioned herself as the better partner, the more supportive woman, the one who truly understood him. He stopped short of calling it manipulation, but the implication was there. Matt Roloff, the man who'd defended Caryn for years, was finally seeing cracks in the narrative he'd built. Caryn responded, but carefully. She denied trying to sabotage Matt's marriage. She insisted she'd only ever supported what Matt said he wanted. If he was now revising his memories, that was his issue, not hers. The tension between them became impossible to ignore. They were still together, technically, but something fundamental had shifted. The relationship that cost Matt his marriage and fractured his family was no longer the fairy tale he'd sold to the public. Amy, for her part, stayed mostly silent. She didn't gloat, she didn't say, "I told you so." She simply continued building her life with Chris, focusing on her grandchildren, and letting Matt's drama unfold without her involvement. But those close to Amy say she feels validated. For years, she was painted as the bitter ex-wife who couldn't move on. Now, with Matt's own words hinting at Caryn's role in the marriage breakdown, Amy's version of events was looking more and more credible. So, what do we learn from the Matt, Amy, and Caryn saga? What does this messy, painful public unraveling teach us about love, betrayal, and the cost of choosing temporary excitement over lasting commitment? First, emotional affairs are still affairs. Matt can insist his relationship with Caryn didn't become romantic until after his separation, but emotional intimacy is intimacy. When you're sharing your thoughts, your frustrations, your dreams with someone other than your spouse, when that person becomes your primary emotional support, you've already left your marriage. The physical relationship is just the final acknowledgement of what's already happened. Second, the person you leave your spouse for rarely lives up to the fantasy. When you're in an affair fog, the other person seems perfect. They don't nag, they don't complain, they support your dreams without questioning your methods, but that's because they're not dealing with the mundane reality of life with you. They're not managing the household budget, raising the kids, or navigating the million small frustrations of daily existence. Once the affair becomes the relationship, reality sets in. And suddenly, that perfect person has needs, expectations, and flaws, just like everyone else. Third, betrayal has a long tail. Matt's relationship with Caryn didn't just end his marriage, it fundamentally changed his relationships with his children. It damaged his public image. It created years of tension and awkwardness. Was it worth it? Only Matt can answer that. But from the outside, it's hard to see how the trade-off makes sense. Fourth, fame complicates everything. If Matt and Amy were just regular people, their divorce would have been painful but private. Instead, every detail was public. Every argument was filmed. Every awkward moment was preserved forever on reality television. Fame and fortune came with a price the Roloffs are still paying. And finally, this story reminds us that karma might not be instant, but it is real. Amy endured years of public speculation, comparison, and criticism. She was called bitter, jealous, and unable to let go. But she kept her dignity. She rebuilt her life. And now, as Matt's relationship with Caryn shows strain, as he begins to question the narrative he sold to the world, Amy's strength and grace look even more impressive. The story of Matt Roloff, Amy Roloff, and Caryn Chandler isn't over. These are real people, still navigating the consequences of choices made years ago. Matt and Caryn are still together, at least as of now, but the cracks are visible. Amy is thriving in her second marriage, finally getting the partnership and respect she deserved all along. The Roloff family empire continues. The farm still draws tourists. The show, though changed, is still on the air. But the fairy tale is gone. In its place is a more complicated, more human story about the cost of betrayal and the long road to healing. We may never know the full truth of what happened between Matt, Amy, and Caryn. We may never get the complete timeline, the private conversations, the moments that tip the balance from friendship to something more. But we have enough. We have Matt's own words, hinting at manipulation and regret. We have Amy's quiet dignity, letting her life speak louder than any accusations. And we have Caryn's uncomfortable position, caught between the past she helped create and a future that's increasingly uncertain. This is the reality behind reality television. This is what happens when cameras capture not just the highlights, but the slow, painful unraveling of relationships that once seemed unbreakable. If this story resonated with you, if you've been following the Roloff family drama for years, or if this is the first time you're hearing the full story, drop a comment below. Do you think Matt is finally seeing the truth about Caryn? Do you believe Amy when she says the relationship started before the separation? And most importantly, what do you think happens next? Subscribe for more deep dives into the reality television moments that defined a generation. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. And remember, behind every reality show, There are real people with real pain. Sometimes the most dramatic stories are the ones that are actually true. Amy Roloff destroys Matt's fake toxic lie. Caught red-handed LPBW update. Amy Roloff has had enough. For years, she stayed quiet. She took the high road. She let Matt Roloff control the narrative about their marriage, their divorce, and why everything fell apart. She listened while he told the world that she was toxic, that their relationship was unhealthy, that leaving her was the best decision he ever made. But now Amy has receipts. And what she's revealing is blowing up everything Matt has said for the past decade. The cameras don't lie, the timeline doesn't lie. And the evidence Amy just dropped proves that Matt Roloff has been lying to millions of fans about who is really toxic in their marriage. This isn't speculation. This isn't tabloid gossip. This is documented proof that the story Matt sold to the world was nothing more than a carefully crafted fiction designed to justify his betrayal. Amy Roloff is done being the villain in someone else's redemption story. And what she's exposing will change everything you thought you knew about Little People Big World. Let's set the stage. When Matt and Amy Roloff's marriage started crumbling on national television, Matt needed a narrative. He couldn't just say he'd fallen for someone else. He couldn't admit that he'd checked out of his marriage emotionally long before he checked out physically. That wouldn't play well with the family values audience that made Little People Big World a success. So, Matt crafted a different story. A story where Amy was the problem. Where she was negative, controlling, and resistant to change. Where her toxic behavior made the marriage impossible to sustain. Where leaving her wasn't a betrayal, but an act of self-preservation. He said it in interviews. He implied it on the show. He let it seep into every conversation about the divorce. Amy was difficult. Amy didn't support his dreams. Amy made life miserable. Matt was the victim, finally breaking free from a toxic relationship. And for years, a significant portion of the fan base believed him. They watched Amy grieve publicly and called her bitter. They watched her struggle with the divorce and said she needed to move on. They watched her express hurt over being replaced and accused her of playing the victim. Matt's narrative was so effective that even Amy's own pain was used against her. Every time she showed emotion, it was proof that she was the toxic one. Every time she expressed anger or sadness, it confirmed Matt's story that she was impossible to live with. But Amy knew the truth. She'd lived it. She'd been there for every moment that Matt was now rewriting. She knew that his version of events was designed to absolve himself of guilt and justify his relationship with Caryn Chandler. The question was, would she ever fight back? Would she ever expose the lies? Or would she continue taking the high road, letting Matt's fiction become accepted history? For a long time, Amy chose silence. She made a few comments here and there, gentle pushbacks that hinted at a different truth but never fully confronted Matt's narrative. She focused on healing, on building a new life with Chris Merrick, on being present for her children and grandchildren. But silence has its limits. And Matt kept talking. He kept positioning himself as the hero of his own story, the man who had the courage to leave a toxic marriage. And every time he said it, he was implicitly calling Amy toxic. Something shifted recently. Maybe it was one comment too many. Maybe it was watching Matt's relationship with Caryn hit rough patches and realizing his whole justification was built on sand. Maybe it was simply deciding that enough was enough. Whatever the reason, Amy Roloff stopped staying quiet. And what she revealed has left Matt scrambling. To understand why Amy's latest revelations are so devastating, you need to understand what Matt has been saying for years. His story has been remarkably consistent. He portrayed himself as a man trapped in an unhappy marriage with a woman who made his life difficult. In interviews, Matt talked about how Amy was resistant to his entrepreneurial vision, how she said no to his ideas, how she created a negative atmosphere that stifled his creativity and ambition. He painted a picture of a man suffocating under the weight of a partner who didn't believe in him. He's also been very careful to frame the timeline of his relationship with Caryn. According to Matt, his marriage to Amy was already dead when his friendship with Caryn turned romantic. He insisted that he didn't leave Amy for Caryn. He left Amy because the marriage was toxic. Caryn just happened to be there afterward, offering the support and positivity that Amy never provided. This narrative served multiple purposes. It absolved the Matt of cheating. It made his new relationship seem pure and unconnected to the marriage breakdown. And it positioned Amy as the reason the marriage failed. The brilliance of Matt's strategy was that he never attacked Amy directly. He was always measured, always reasonable sounding. He'd say things like, "Amy and I just weren't compatible anymore. Our communication styles were toxic for each other. I needed to choose my own happiness." It sounded mature. It sounded like someone who'd done the work in therapy and came out with healthy insights. But underneath the therapeutic language was a simple message. Amy was the problem. Many fans bought it completely. They praised Matt for his bravery in leaving an unhappy marriage. They celebrated his relationship with Caryn as a deserved second chance. They watched Amy's grief and told her to get over it already. Matt's version of events became so dominant that even neutral observers started accepting it as fact. Articles about the divorce would casually mention the toxic marriage, as if it were established truth rather than one person's characterization. And Amy? She'd occasionally push back gently. She'd say that she didn't think the marriage was as toxic as Matt claimed. That they had problems, yes, but that toxic felt like an unfair characterization. That she believed Matt's relationship with Caryn started earlier than he admitted. But she never went for the jugular. She never brought evidence. She never systematically dismantled his narrative. Until now. The first crack in Matt's story came when fans started rewatching old episodes of Little People Big World with fresh eyes. Once you know how the story ends, you see things differently. And what fans noticed was striking. In episodes from 2010 to 2014, before the separation, Matt is the one who seems distant and disengaged. He's constantly working on farm projects, often alone or with staff, including Caryn. He misses family dinners. He's absent from important moments with the kids. When he is present, he's often irritable and dismissive of Amy's concerns. Meanwhile, Amy is the one holding the family together. She's managing the household, coordinating the kids' schedules, dealing with the emotional needs of 4 growing children. Yes, she's sometimes critical of Matt's projects, but usually because they're over budget or taking time away from family commitments. When you watch these episodes knowing Matt's later claims about toxicity, something doesn't add up. The person who seems to be creating negativity isn't Amy. It's Matt, with his constant frustration that Amy won't just go along with whatever he wants. In therapy sessions filmed for the show, the pattern becomes even clearer. Amy expresses feeling abandoned and unappreciated. She says Matt prioritizes everything except their relationship. She's trying to save the marriage while Matt seems to have one foot out the door. Matt's complaints in those sessions? Amy doesn't support his vision. She's too cautious. She doesn't understand him. These aren't complaints about toxic behavior. These are complaints about having a partner who asks questions and expects accountability. But the most damning evidence was always hiding in plain sight. The timeline. Matt moved out in 2014, claiming he needed space to work on the marriage. But he didn't move to an apartment in town. He moved into a house on the farm property, a house that Caryn Chandler was frequently seen at, a house that Caryn helped decorate and organize. Matt insisted this was innocent. She was his assistant. Of course she'd help him set up his new living space. There was nothing inappropriate happening. But then fans started compiling photos and social media posts. Caryn at family events, sitting close to Matt, with a familiarity that seemed to go beyond professional. Matt and Caryn on what looked like dates, posted months before he publicly confirmed they were together. The two of them traveled together for the farm business that seemed to conveniently require overnight trips. The evidence suggested that Matt's relationship with Caryn began long before he was admitted, which would mean his entire narrative about leaving a toxic marriage before finding new love was a lie. It would mean he had an emotional affair, possibly a physical one, and then rewrote history to make himself look honorable. Amy saw all of this. She knew the timeline better than anyone. She'd lived through the gradual replacement, watching Caryn take more and more space in Matt's life while she was pushed to the margins. But still, she largely stayed quiet. Until recently, when something changed. When Amy decided that protecting Matt's reputation at the expense of her own truth was no longer acceptable. The breaking point came during a recent interview where Matt once again characterized his marriage to Amy as toxic. He was talking about his relationship with Caryn, explaining why he was so committed to making it work. And he said again that he'd spent too many years in a toxic marriage, and he wasn't going to repeat those patterns. For Amy, hearing Matt casually throw around the word toxic one more time was the final straw, because toxic implies abuse. It implies that the relationship was harmful in fundamental ways. It suggests that Amy was damaging to Matt's well-being. And Amy knew that wasn't true. She knew that what Matt called toxic was really just accountability. She knew that what he characterized as negativity was actually her asking him to be present for his family. She knew that his complaints about her not supporting his vision really meant she wouldn't give him blank checks and blind approval for every impulsive idea. So, Amy did something she'd never done before. She went public with specific evidence. Not vague statements, not gentle corrections, actual receipts. First, she released information about the financial situation during their marriage. Matt had always portrayed himself as the breadwinner, the dreamer who built the farm empire while Amy held him back. But Amy revealed that she'd contributed equally to building the farm. She'd worked just as hard, invested just as much, and taken just as many risks. The difference was that Matt took credit for successes while blaming her for any hesitation about his more reckless ideas. She shared emails and text messages from the period before their separation, communications where she was asking Matt to spend more time with the family, messages where she expressed concern about his close relationship with Caryn, texts where Matt was dismissive, irritable, and emotionally distant. These weren't the messages of a toxic person making someone's life miserable. These were the messages of a wife watching her husband check out their marriage and desperately trying to save it. Then Amy addressed the timeline directly. She confirmed what many fans had already suspected. Matt's relationship with Caryn was not an innocent friendship that turned romantic after the separation. It was an emotional affair that developed while Matt was still married. Caryn became his primary emotional support, his confidant, the person he turned to instead of his wife. Amy stopped short of claiming there was physical infidelity before the separation, but she made it clear that the emotional betrayal was complete long before Matt moved out. By the time he left, he had already replaced her in every way that mattered. She also revealed that Matt had rewritten the story of their marriage counseling. He'd claimed they went to therapy, but Amy wasn't willing to do the work. The truth, according to Amy, was that Matt used therapy as a box to check. He went through the motions but had no real intention of saving the marriage because he'd already decided his future was with Caryn. The most damaging revelation was about Matt's use of the word toxic. Amy shared that during their marriage counseling, the therapist never characterized their relationship as toxic. The therapist identified communication issues, different priorities, and grew apart. Those are normal marital problems. Difficult, yes, but not toxic. The word toxic was Matt's invention, a term he started using after the divorce to justify his choices and vilify Amy. It was a PR strategy, not a clinical assessment. The response to Amy's revelations was immediate and intense. Fans who'd believed Matt's narrative for years suddenly saw the situation in a completely different light. Comment sections exploded with people apologizing to Amy for years of criticism. Hashtags supporting Amy trended on social media. But the most significant fallout was within the Roloff family itself. Amy's children, particularly Zach and Tori, had always been careful about publicly taking sides. They loved both their parents and wanted to maintain relationships with both. But Amy's decision to finally speak her truth gave them permission to be more honest about what they'd witnessed. Zach made comments supporting his mother's version of events. He confirmed that the family had struggled with Matt's relationship with Caryn, particularly because of how quickly it became public after the separation. He validated Amy's feelings about being replaced. Tori, who'd always had a complicated relationship with Matt, was more direct. She posted messages of support for Amy, praising her strength and dignity. She also unfollowed Caryn on social media, a small gesture that spoke volumes. Even Jeremy, who'd historically been closer to Matt, seemed to distance himself. He didn't make public statements, but his silence was notable. He didn't rush to defend his father's narrative the way he might have in the past. The farm itself became a focal point of the drama. Amy had sold her portion to Matt, but many fans argued that Matt's characterization of their marriage as toxic while keeping the empire they built together was the ultimate hypocrisy. If the relationship was so terrible, why was he so desperate to keep the property they'd created as a team? Matt's response to Amy's revelations was telling. He didn't directly refute her specific claims. Instead, he posted vague messages about everyone having their own truth and how he wouldn't engage in public mudslinging. He positioned himself as the mature one, rising above the drama. But his refusal to address the specific evidence Amy presented looked like an admission. If her claims were false, why not provide contrary evidence? If the timeline she described was inaccurate, why not correct it with facts? Caryn's position became even more uncomfortable. She'd spent years trying to win over Roloff fans, trying to prove she wasn't the homewrecker that many suspected. Amy's revelations, particularly about the emotional affair timeline, destroyed years of image rehabilitation. Caryn tried to respond, posting about how every story has multiple perspectives and how she wouldn't defend herself against unfair attacks, but her defensiveness only made her look more guilty. The relationship between Matt and Caryn, already showing strain, seemed to crack further under the pressure. Matt's narrative about leaving toxicity for healthy love was exposed as fiction. What did that mean for the relationship he'd built on that lie? In the weeks following Amy's revelations, the entire narrative around the Roloff divorce shifted. Media outlets that had previously accepted Matt's characterization of a toxic marriage started asking harder questions. Interviews with Matt became more confrontational. Journalists pushed him to reconcile his claims with Amy's evidence. Matt tried to maintain his position, but his answers became increasingly vague and defensive. He'd say things like, "That's Amy's perspective," or "I remember things differently," without providing specifics. When pressed on the timeline of his relationship with Caryn, he'd get irritable and change the subject. The court of public opinion had turned. Fans who'd criticized Amy for years were now seeing her as the hero of the story, a woman who'd endured betrayal, character assassination, and public humiliation with grace. Who'd rebuilt her life without destroying Matt's reputation, who'd only spoken her full truth when Matt's continued lies made silence untenable. Amy, for her part, didn't gloat. She'd said what needed to be said, provided the evidence to back it up, and moved on. She focused on her marriage to Chris, her relationships with her children and grandchildren, and her own projects and passions. But the shift in public perception had real consequences. Matt's motivational speaking career took a hit. Event organizers questioned whether someone who'd lied about his marriage to justify an affair was the right person to inspire audiences. His book sales declined. His social media engagement dropped. Meanwhile, Amy's popularity soared. She became a symbol of resilience and dignity. Her cookbook became a bestseller. Her social media following grew exponentially. Brands wanted to partner with her because she represented authentic strength. The farm, the property that had been the center of so much conflict, also felt the impact. Some fans announced boycotts, refusing to visit as long as Matt owned it. Others organized Team Amy visits, making sure to tag Amy in their photos, even though she no longer had an ownership stake. The show itself had to navigate this new reality. Little People, Big World had always tried to present balanced perspectives, but Amy's revelations made that impossible. The footage didn't lie. Old episodes showed exactly what Amy described. The show's producers faced a choice: continue presenting Matt's narrative or acknowledge that years of coverage had been based on his fiction. They chose a middle path, letting the family members speak for themselves, but providing more context from old footage. Viewers could watch the episodes and draw their own conclusions, and increasingly, those conclusions supported Amy's version of events. The Matt and Amy Roloff saga teaches us something crucial about narrative control and truth. For years, Matt controlled the story. He had the platform, the confidence, and the willingness to characterize his ex-wife in ways that served his purposes. And because Amy initially chose dignity over defense, his narrative became dominant. But truth has a way of emerging. You can craft a story, spin a tale, rewrite history to flatter yourself, but eventually, evidence surfaces. Timelines get checked. People start asking questions, and the fiction you've been selling falls apart. Matt's use of the word toxic is particularly instructive. In our current culture, that word carries enormous weight. Calling a relationship toxic immediately puts you in the victim position. It suggests that leaving was an act of self-care, even survival. It preempts criticism because who would judge someone for escaping toxicity? But words matter. Using clinical-sounding language to describe normal marital conflict is manipulative. Characterizing a spouse as toxic when the real issue is that they held you accountable is gaslighting on a grand scale. Amy's decision to finally fight back also teaches us something important. Taking the high road is admirable, but not when it means letting lies define you. There's a difference between dignified silence and allowing someone to destroy your unchallenged reputation. For years, people told Amy to move on, to stop talking about the past, to let it go. But how do you move on when someone is actively lying about you? How do you let go when those lies are affecting your relationships, your reputation, your livelihood? Amy's timing was strategic. She didn't lash out in the immediate aftermath of the divorce when she could have been dismissed as bitter. She built a new life first, found happiness, and demonstrated her strength. Then, from a position of stability and peace, she presented the truth. That's powerful. That's the difference between reacting from pain and responding from strength. The situation also highlights how affairs work in real time versus how they're remembered later. At the moment, the person having the affair always minimizes it. It's just friendship. It's emotional support during a difficult time. It only turned romantic after things were already over with the spouse. But that's rarely the full truth. Emotional affairs are still affairs. They still represent a fundamental betrayal. They still involve choosing to build intimate connections with someone other than your partner. The lack of physical contact doesn't make it innocent. Matt's insistence that his relationship with Caryn started after his marriage ended is technically unprovable either way, but Amy's evidence about the emotional intimacy, the time spent together, the ways Caryn replaced her long before the divorce, tells the real story. Amy Roloff destroyed Matt's toxic marriage narrative because she had something Matt didn't count on. The truth. Not her truth or his truth, but actual documentable truth. Emails, texts, timelines, footage from the show itself contradicted his later characterizations. Matt bet that his version of events would become history simply because he said it loudly and consistently. He underestimated Amy's integrity and her willingness to eventually fight back. He thought she'd stay quiet forever, letting him control the narrative while she faded into the background of her own story. He was wrong. The Roloff family drama is far from over. Matt and Caryn are still together, though their relationship seems increasingly strained under the weight of its own origin story. Amy and Chris are thriving, building a partnership based on mutual respect rather than narrative manipulation. The kids are navigating their relationships with both parents, trying to love them both while acknowledging hard truths. But the narrative has shifted permanently. Matt can no longer casually claim he escaped a toxic marriage without people questioning what he means by toxicity. He can no longer present his relationship with Caryn as pure and disconnected from his marriage breakdown. He can no longer position himself as the victim, and Amy is the problem. That's the power of truth. It might take years to emerge fully. It might require someone finding the courage to speak after a long silence, but eventually, it reshapes everything. If you've been following the Roloff family for years, drop a comment about how your perspective has changed. Do you believe in Amy's version of events? Do you think Matt's characterization of their marriage as toxic was fair or manipulative? And what do you think this means for the future of Little People, Big World? Subscribe for more updates on this ongoing story and other reality TV revelations that prove truth is always stranger than fiction. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. And remember, the narrative you're being sold isn't always the truth. Sometimes it takes years and someone's courage to expose what really happened. Amy Roloff isn't the toxic one. She's the truth teller. And that makes all the difference.
Half of Roloff Farms is officially gone. After years of promises about legacy, family inheritance, and keeping the dream alive, a major portion of the land that built Little People Big World has been sold. Not transferred to the kids. Not kept in the family. Sold. But here is what makes this even more shocking. The sale comes after failed negotiations with Zach Roloff. After Amy Roloff already walked away from her share. And while Matt Roloff and Caryn Chandler continue planning their future together. So the real question is not just how much the farm sold for. The real question is this. Was this always the plan? In this video, we are breaking down the timeline, the numbers, the negotiations that fell apart, and the emotional fallout that changed the future of Roloff Farms forever. Because when half the farm disappears, it is not just land that is lost. It is legacy. Roloff Farms in Oregon was never just land. It was the heart of Little People Big World. When Matt Roloff and Amy Roloff first built their dream there, it was a risky investment. Over time, pumpkin season turned it into a regional attraction. The show turned it into a national landmark. And the farm became a symbol of family unity, even during conflict. But unity did not last. After Amy and Matt divorced, ownership of the property became complicated. Amy eventually sold her portion to Matt for a reported multi-million-dollar deal. Publicly, she said it was too painful to remain tied to the land she once called home. Privately, fans sensed something deeper. It felt like she was letting go of more than property. She was letting go of history. Fast forward to the recent sale. Matt listed a large section of Roloff Farms for sale after negotiations with Zach Roloff fell apart. Zach and Tori had expressed interest in purchasing part of the property. Those talks did not succeed. The disappointment was visible. Zach later described the negotiation process as difficult and hurtful. When the property hit the market, it was listed for millions. After sitting for some time, the listing changed. Eventually, a significant portion was sold. While exact final figures vary by report, the reality is clear. A major piece of the original dream is no longer in the family. And that changes everything. For years, fans believed the farm would pass down to the children. That was the storyline. That was the expectation. The show built emotional investment around legacy. Instead, what viewers witnessed was fragmentation. One son moved away. Another pursued separate ventures. And the land that once represented generational continuity became a financial asset on the open market. Where does Caryn Chandler fit into this? Caryn, who began as a long-time manager at Roloff Farms, later became Matt's partner. As their relationship became public, so did the criticism. Some viewers believe she influenced key business decisions. Others argue Matt has always been the primary decision-maker. There is no legal evidence that Caryn controlled the sale. There is no proof of secret contracts or hidden transfers. But perception in reality television can be more powerful than paperwork. And many fans feel that her presence symbolizes the shift away from the original family vision. Meanwhile, Amy Roloff has built a new life. She remarried. She moved forward. Yet every time a headline appears about the farm being sold, her name resurfaces. Because she represents the emotional foundation of Roloff Farms. When half the farm is sold, it feels like half the story disappears with it. The deeper question is not how much money changed hands. It is what was lost in the process. The farm once stood as proof that two very different personalities could build something extraordinary together. Matt was the visionary. Amy was the stabilizer. Their dynamic created the brand that sustained the show for more than a decade. Now, that shared creation exists in fragments. Matt continues to defend his decisions as business-driven. He has emphasized that maintaining such a large property is expensive. He has suggested that selling portions ensures financial stability. From a practical standpoint, that argument makes sense. But reality television is never just practical. It is emotional. Fans do not measure Roloff Farms in acreage. They measure it in memories. Birthday parties in the big house. Kids running through pumpkin patches. Holiday gatherings under Oregon skies. The sale feels like a signal that the era we grew up watching is officially over. And then there is Amy. Even though she no longer owns a portion of the farm, her legacy is permanently attached to it. Every beam in that house carries part of her story. Every pumpkin season echoes her voice welcoming guests. The land may change hands, but the narrative cannot erase her role in building it. In many ways, the sale validates her decision to leave. She once said it was too hard to stay connected to something that no longer felt emotionally safe. Watching pieces of it leave the family might confirm what she already understood. The farm had changed long before the sign went up. So, what happens next? Little People Big World faces an uncertain future. With family members living in different states and the property no longer unified, the central storyline grows thinner. The farm was the anchor. Without it, the show must redefine itself or quietly fade. Half the farm sold is not just a real estate transaction. It is a symbol of transition, of ambition colliding with expectation, of a family that built something extraordinary and then struggled to decide who would carry it forward. In the end, the land remains in Oregon. Matt and Caryn remain together. Amy remains a central emotional figure for viewers. But the original vision of Roloff Farms as a generational inheritance is gone. And sometimes, the most powerful plot twist is not a scandal. It is a signature on a sales contract that changes everything.